So a keyword searched in the digital archives of the New York Times in the US and the Times in the UK by one scholar has shown that the term human rights was not widely used before 1977. After 1977, however, the usage of the term has shot up. So how do we account for this? And one way is to say, like the scholar did, that human rights, as we know them today, did not exist before 1977. Another way, which is my preference, is to simply note that the New York Times and the Times are Western media, much more interested in citing Western uses of the term, that is to say, uses more aligned with American and British interpretations and interests. So these interpretations, which go hand in hand with how human rights were employed in the Western media post 1977, dissociate rights from broader concerns with social and post-colonial justice. They repackage these rights as individual possessions that rationalize often the use of force, as we saw later on with humanitarian intervention and R2P, etc. But the association between human rights and social justice has actually a much longer history before 1977. So this association wasn't simply a matter of morality or just, accept it's the right thing to do to talk about social justice, but importantly, it was relevant to the question of international peace. In other words, in the absence of social justice, the world descended into nationalistic antagonism. The famous beggar thee neighbor policies, and which all ultimately culminated in total wars. And this was the account of E.H. Carr of the two world wars. So E.H. Carr explained the two world wars in light of this account. So to IR scholars, Carr is probably best known as a historian associated with the classical realist school and the discipline. It's perhaps less known that Carr was also a significant figure in the human rights story. So in 1945, for example, Carr chaired a committee sponsored by the UNESCO that was tasked with producing a report on the theoretical basis of human rights. In the report, Carr argued that human rights had to advance the cause of social justice. Any declaration of rights which would be felt to have any validity today, Carr wrote, must include social and economic as well as political rights. So according to Carr, the international order didn't break down in the 1930s simply because Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan became excessively aggressive. In fact, the international order faced a moral bankruptcy. The 19th century laissez-faire was incompatible with the 20th century age of mass democracy and the colonial revolution. It's this same moral bankruptcy that drives many movements in history today. So for example, we heard many writers in recent years talk about the question whether democracy and liberalism are compatible with each other. We heard other scholars who talked about, and also economists who told us that the backlash against globalization is due to social economic issues such as unemployment. The colonial and the race questions are also still unresolved. We have many historians of the Middle East, for example, that tell us that there's a sense of discontent in the region that drives the demand for change and also drives events like the Arab Spring, for example. So given this background, we might ask, well, what does the historical dissociation between human rights and social justice mean? The dissociation, in my view, means that the concepts such as human rights that originated in the quest for a just peace after the war turned into its opposite, rationalizing war. It's this change in the meaning of human rights that made the concept relevant in the pages of the New York Times and the Times. In other words, it's precisely when the concept became detached from its origin and original purpose of peace that it became ever popularized in the West. So in conclusion, it's the historical dissociation between human rights and social justice that, in my view, finds this decontextualization of the meaning of rights for the purpose of using force. And I don't think this is just a lesson or a conclusion that we can reach only about human rights. It's not just peculiar to this concept. It's also, it happened with other noble concepts in politics and international relations, most famously with the concept of democracy, for example. It stemmed out of a context as a serious attempt to allow people to live together in peace, but also ended up paradoxically being decontextualized for the purpose of rationalizing war, as we saw, for example, in Iraq. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.